Conference is really around the G7 and the effort of the Boston Global Forum to contribute ideas for consideration at the upcoming G7 meeting. An example from the past is the white paper that we produced on cybersecurity with an emphasis on ethical codes and standards. And this year we're submitting a white paper around artificial intelligence. Tuan has distributed to you a copy of that document. Tuan asked if I would kind of briefly summarize the content of it. I'm not an AI expert. I had a small part in the drafting of the document. There are people at the table who had a larger part, know more about this subject. Tuan did a lot of the drafting, Nasli, David, others. I'm kind of their editor. That's kind of the role that I often play with these documents. But I do want to give you a quick, brief overview of what's in the document and invite you to look more carefully at what's being proposed. So that, see if I can get this to work. In this effort, we're working to some degree with the World Leadership Alliance, the Club de Madrid. Most of you, maybe all of you, know about the Club de Madrid, the membership of which is former heads of state, heads of government of democratic countries. And what we're trying to do is kind of think ahead a little bit about AI and where AI can advance governance and where it can advance citizenship with particular kind of goals, specific goals in mind in each of those areas. And there are two components of the model that are described in the document that Tuan has distributed. One is what we are calling AI government. That's the application of AI to assist public sector decision making and to strengthen government accountability. The other is AI citizen, and that's the application of AI to empower citizens and to enhance or heighten their accountability, not only accountability of government, but the accountability of citizens as well. The goals of AI government, I'll talk a little bit about AI government, and then I'll talk a little bit about AI citizen. The goals of AI government, at least the broad goals, are to improve the quality of public services, and secondly, to increase both the efficiency and the accountability of administrative units and personnel. Now, a key part of the model that we're proposing, and this is very visionary, this is trying to look ahead, is what we call the National Decision Making and Data Center. I was struck by what the Consul General said about the collection of health data in France and the power that comes with that data. This is an attempt to collect lots and lots of data from lots and lots of units of government across many policy spheres. I don't know if any of you have tried to work with big data. It can be really frustrating, particularly in the American case. Sometimes you can get access to the data set, but not the code book, and you have no idea what the numbers mean and the like. But here's an idea about kind of bringing all of this data together so that it can communicate across spheres, so that you can take information, for example, in the area of transportation, which relates to public health, areas of social services, which relate to public health, and really use the power of big data in making decisions about policy and in delivering government services. To implement AI government, obviously, you would need to build this National Decision-Making Center. You need to provide mechanisms to evaluate the performance of administrative units and officials. The Consul General talked a lot about setting rules on the protection of privacy and personal data, which would be essential in this kind of system. And then ultimately working toward creating automated public services in many, many areas of public policy. And we're also proposing an index, and this is really outside the model in a certain sense. This is something that the Boston Global Forum would be doing, and this is basically monitoring the progress that governments are making toward AI government and using pretty substantial standards. These are just a few of the standards that would be applied in creating that index. They'd be weighted differently, but we would be reviewing, looking at countries based on transparency, compliance, implementation, the integrity of their programs, and universality, the degree to which their efforts really are designed to work across the whole of the society. The second component is AI citizen, and we have a definition of AI citizen. And all of this, of course, is subject to your suggestions for improvement of what we're proposing. AI citizen refers to people who reside legally in a country and who respect the common global values set forth by the UN. And the purpose of AI citizen is to empower, in the first instance, to empower citizens, and then also to make them more responsible for their actions as citizens. We have some specific goals with AI Citizen. One is to nurture and reward innovation, creativity, and so on. Second is to enable individuals to participate more fully and actively in politics and society, and then to enable individuals to better hold government and other actors accountable for what they do. Some mechanisms that we think are necessary to operationalize this concept of AI citizen. Some kind of support center that would provide citizens with the information they know they would need to have in order to make decisions. Some mechanism for amplifying their voice and channeling it to the appropriate officials or organizations. And this is probably the most controversial part of it. I'm not personally sold on it, but we didn't have a chance to really debate it very much. Some kind of social value reward system, which would provide citizens a way to track their contributions to society, as well as a way for society to acknowledge those contributions. I worry a little bit that this kind of changes the incentives for contributions from intrinsic to extrinsic, but sort of thinking about how do we recognize the individuals in society who are making contributions. Implementation of this particular concept, you obviously have to work AI literacy and the ethical norms surrounding AI into the education system. You would need to develop the mechanisms that I just outlined in the previous slide. You need standards, of course, and ensure that citizens have equal access and equal opportunity in this system. In the summary, AIWS model that we propose envisions a society where innovation, creativity, and dedication, democracy, individual rights, and the rule of law are recognized and promoted, and where AI is used to assist and improve government decision-making to make progress towards a more socially inclusive and just society in which citizens have a larger voice in their governing. So that's a quick overview. The document itself is far more detailed in all of these parts. I do invite you to take a look at it. It is still a work in progress. It's still sort of in draft stage, but we're going to close it down pretty quickly. So if you have some thoughts on that, please communicate them to Tuan. But I would like to give a copy of the current draft, and we will give a more polished and final draft to the Consul General. And he will convey it to his government and then into the G7 process. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We can do this. We'll pretend like it's a final. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So each year at this conference, we grant our World Leader Award. This year, the World Leader in AI World Society. And I'm pleased to announce that this year's recipient is Vincent Cerf. Vint Cerf is recognized as a father of the internet, sharing the title with co-inventor Bob Kahn. His contributions have been widely acknowledged with a long list of honorary degrees, including doctorates from Yale and Tsinghua University, and numerous awards, including the U.S. National Medal of Technology, the Turing Award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Marconi Prize. He was an inaugural inductee of the Internet Hall of Fame. After his pioneering work in creating the internet while at the U.S. Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, Mr. Cerf helped develop the first commercial email system. Then, in the 1990s, along with Bob Kahn and others, he founded the Internet Society, ISOC, to provide leadership in creating standards and policy relating to the internet. He subsequently helped found ICANN, which coordinates name and numerical spaces on the internet, and would later serve as chairman of ICANN's board. He serves on the advisory board of the Council of Cybersecurity and is a past president of the Association for Computing Machinery. Since 2005, Mr. Cerf has been with Google as a vice president and as its chief internet evangelist, a position which has enabled him to be a leading voice in how technology will shape society in areas such as artificial intelligence, the environment, and digital transformation. A distinguishing feature of Mr. Cerf's long and remarkable career has been his effort to ensure that the internet serves humanitarian values. He has been a tireless advocate of net neutrality and for making broadband technology more widely available, and has supported innovative approaches to global problems, including the digital divide and the gender gap. The digital revolution is transforming how we live, work, and connect with each other, and few individuals have made a larger and more positive contribution to that transformation than has Vint Cerf. We are honored to recognize him as this year's recipient of the World Leader in AI World Society Award. And we have now a video from Mr. Cerf.
It's a great honor to be recognized by the AI World Society and certainly by Governor Dukakis, and I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person. But I will say that this focus of attention on artificial intelligence and the role that it might play in present and in our future is timely and important. In fact, I would go so far as to suggest that we should be equally concerned in general about any kind of software, especially if it's in some kind of a device that has the ability to communicate on the internet. And the reason for that, quite frankly, is that once those devices are online, they're potentially reachable by anyone, anywhere on the internet. And that raises all kinds of potential security hazards. So the attack surface, if I could use that term, is quite broad when any device is attached to the global internet. So we should be very concerned not only about artificial intelligence, but about software in general, especially software that has bugs. And unfortunately, we're at the stage now, 8 years into programming computers, where we haven't figured out how to write software that doesn't have bugs. The consequence of that, of course, is that if those bugs are discovered, they may be exploited by people with malicious intent, and there can be all kinds of side effects. So in some respects, I think we should be as concerned about software and its bugs as we should be about artificial intelligence and our uncertainty about how some of it works, in particular machine learning systems where the multi-layer neural networks are programmed by running them through a whole series of examples, whether it's images or sound or text or something else. might have internal biases that we didn't recognize, or might break in ways that we can't anticipate. A small change in an incoming image might cause a completely wrong decision or recognition to be made by the artificially intelligent machine learning system. So I think we are well advised to stay focused on artificial intelligence, machine learning, bugs in software, how we use these things, how much autonomy we offer to devices that are running this kind of software, especially if it's going to make decisions that we don't have any role to play in. Even your refrigerator could be abused by running software in the device, in the operating system, or in the computer in such a way that you don't notice that if there's anything wrong, the ice cream stays cold, your milk stays cold. But this device, which is on the network, is also being used as part of a botnet. It's generating spam, it's distributing malware. It could be a variety of things. And we wouldn't notice because it's doing its other functions correctly as well. This leads to a very general concern about understanding about the safety, the security, the integrity of software that we use in communicating devices. So I'm hoping to have an opportunity to participate in 2020. I apologize for my inability to do so this year, but I do appreciate recognition of the importance of this topic. And I hope that during the 2019 conference that you'll come up with some good ideas for paths to follow to create a more safe, more stable, and secure environment. So thanks again very much for this recognition. I look forward to seeing you on the net.
Right. So next is our featured speaker, Paul Nemitz, who has come to us from the European Commission. He's come in from Brussels, had dinner with him last night, and Paul, the podium is yours. So, why don't you just stay up here after you're talking?
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss, and especially in the great setting, the very global presence today, and also the interdisciplinary mixture of participants coming from academia, technology, diplomacy. I think we will have a very good discussion. Much has been said already, so I will not delve again into what is AI. I think it's like day and night. We know now it's day, we know when it's night, when it's dark. When the sun goes down, where we draw the line between day and night, we could have a very, very long discussion, but we don't need the discussion on AI. When we see it, we know it. At the same time, I think it's also fair to say that there's a certain hype about AI. We have just seen a study produced among startups which claim that they use or develop AI, and more than 30% of those who claim to do AI actually don't. It's very fashionable right now for consultants and advisories and also in academia to say, we are working on AI, but actually there is not so much new. So why? Why are we nevertheless having this high degree of activity both by companies but also by governments and academia? Because on the one hand, there is a promise, and I would say, an enthusiastic promise that this technology will solve a lot of problems. And on the other hand, there are people who describe apocalyptic risks coming from this technology. And in the middle of all this, are the policymakers, and we have heard already today about the French vision, and I think the European vision, the European Commission's vision is exactly the same, who have the task to maximize the potential for society in terms of economic growth, employment, but also public interest beyond those two areas, and also want to minimize the risks. And I think that's what I would like to focus a little bit on, namely what can law and ethics contribute to this balance. Let me say that, like France, and here just a word about the complication of Europe, the European Union has a strategy for AI which says that every member state should have a strategy of AI, and we are, I think, mutually inspiring each other. It's a very iterative process in Europe between the member states and the European Union. And so the European Commission presented a strategy on AI in April of last year, which contains three big chapters, namely, like in France, the industrial policy and research aspect. Of course, we want to be leaders in the technology, leaders in research. Second, the preparation of the labor market. We need people to acquire the skills, lifelong learning, also in the older generation, both to develop but also to adopt and use AI, and I would say not only as a customer but as a citizen who understands also a little bit the risks and advantages when using this technology. So this is acquiring skills not only to, let's say, participate in commerce, but, and I think that's the uniqueness and interest here in the project of AI World Society, also to use and work with this technology in future processes of governance, public interest and democracy. And third, ethics and law for AI. It has often been said that it's the great disadvantage of Europe that we are leaders in ethics debates and making laws, while others develop the technology and reap the economic benefit. And this is in fact a discourse which I have been a witness of all my life working in public service. This has been said on the relating to the internet. It has been said relating to modern technologies of energy. It's a reoccurring discourse. It has been a very deep discourse relating to environmental protection, for example, in the 90s already. The invention by Europe in primary law of the principle of precaution relating to technology was announced as a huge catastrophe for economic development, and promises were made that Europe would fall behind in economics and technology. And I myself, when I was lead director on the GDPR in the European Commission, was confronted, for example, by a study from the American Chamber of Commerce which said, if you implement this law, if you adopt it, it means minus 5% of GDP in Europe. So I would say, together with messianic promises of technology, go announcements of economic interest that if you apply the principle of precaution, there will be huge negative consequences. That's normal. That's interest-driven discourse. The empirical reality is completely different. If we look back, for example, at the environmental movement and its successes, we have seen that being environmentally sustainable as an enterprise means also to be resource efficient. And it has become a huge driver for profitability, not only for European companies, but for companies worldwide to become ecologically sustainable and therefore resource efficient in terms of using as little as possible natural resources. And in the end, some were only convinced when the slogan of the greening of GE, General Electric, went around the world, and some are still not convinced today that we can marry in a very productive way the goals of climate change and ecological protection with economic growth. So it's clear that we will never convince all, but I would say that there is a large conviction in Europe stemming from the time of the ecological movement, the anti-atomic energy movement, also the peace movement at the time all went hand in hand, started in the 70s with the great book of Hans Jonas, The Principle of Responsibility, written in New York at the New School of Social Research, that the principle of precaution applied as part of innovation policy is a secret of success and not of failure. Because applying this principle of precaution as part of innovation, as an integral part of innovation, ensures long-term sustainability, not only from an ecological point of view, but also from a point of view of economic and social and political sustainability of a technology or a business model. And the empirics in this I could now develop further, but they are most striking in the greening of industry. Now let me turn, before I come to what this means for AI, for a moment to data protection and the GDPR process. Of course, historically speaking, Europe has a completely different outlook on personal data and the related right of individual informational self-determination than America, for that matter, or China. Why? Because Europe has a completely different history. Big parts of Europe have lived through communist dictatorships. Germany has lived through fascist dictatorships. And in both of these dictatorships, the aim of government was to know everything about everybody. And this historical experience raises the sensitivity about collection, and it is this historical background which led to the creation of the legal concept of informational self-determination as a fundamental right, as a civil liberty, which at that time was not written in any constitution by judges and courts in Europe. And when I say by judges and courts in Europe, you can really go through the different layers of jurisprudence on fundamental rights and civil liberties, and you find this concept in the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, based on the European Convention of Human Rights, a system where member states of this convention, which are the EU member states plus a few more, are controlled from the outside by a court in Strasbourg, whether they comply with fundamental and human rights, right through constitutional courts in many of the member states. So this pre-existing principle was put in EU law in 1995 already into a directive, and honestly GDPR has not brought any new principles which are a revolution, but it's rather an evolution of the instrument which already existed from 1995. The most important evolution is certainly the powers of data protection authorities in the member states, which are independent and which can now fine companies which don't comply with the rules up to 4% of their world turnover. That has certainly raised the attention of boardrooms all over the world, and that was the intention. That was the political intention we had. I still remember the moment when we had a first discussion where I asked the question, what about aligning the fining system of GDPR to the fining system in competition law? Because when it's about cartels, when it's about antitrust, we have a fining system, like in America, very rigorous. We can impose up to 10% of world turnover on companies as a fine, and we do it. But in data protection at the time, the highest fine in Europe was 600,000. So at that time, we started to work on aligning the both fining systems, and in terms of methodology, it has worked. We have a percentage of world turnover. The political compromise, and I think that's normal in democracy, is It's not the same, it's just, quote, quote, 4%. But enough to impress. And so it took altogether 6 years to get this regulation into place, because you can imagine the lobby trying to avoid this at all costs. And I would say historically we were in a fortunate situation. We had a vice president of the commission who was from the conservative, you would say in America, Republican side. We had a rapporteur in the European Parliament who was from the Green side, you would say liberal, Democrat. And then, of course, we had Edward Snowden as a wake-up call, which brought home to everybody what these technologies today allow. And altogether, this was a historical, lucky moment to get this instrument through. I would say, and this now I'm speculating, but I can tell you, before Snowden, there were moments when we thought we will never make it in the European Parliament. We had nearly 4,000 amendments in the democratic process in the Parliament. But Snowden really was a wake-up call and made a huge difference in the negotiation of this instrument. And so at this moment, when we are at a very important American contribution to getting GDPR in place, let me branch out a little bit on what we have learned from America and what we are learning now also in relation to AI. Because the discourse that America mainly develops the technology and makes the money, and on the other hand you have China, which also develops the technology, but not only for money, but mainly to have a successful communist dictatorship, to control the people. The good old dream of the Communist Party since 1917 to fulfill communism through technology, finally achieved through AI in China, social scoring system and all these things. I think this discourse has a few defects. And here in Boston, in Harvard, we can see the defect, which is, it is of course not true to describe America as just one big commercial block represented by the stock market, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on. But there's a lot of very, very good work and very, very good thinking in America, which we have profited from in the work on GDPR and which we are also now profiting from in the work on AI. And today's discussion and the paper which has been produced here in Boston with a focus on making AI useful for democracy and for public interest, not only for targeted advertisement, which is of course the great moneymaker right now, is just one example of many. I would like to quote another example, which is very, very important, which is right now the work of the FTC. I arrived here in Boston and I learned that Facebook makes provision of up to $5 billion for a possible fine of the FTC because Facebook did not follow up on its promises relating to privacy. I have to say, I have a great respect for the work of the FTC. Over the years, I've worked a lot together with the colleagues from the FTC, Edith Ramirez, the chairwoman under President Obama. They have been extremely helpful when we negotiated. I was the negotiating leader for the Commission of the Privacy Shield, very professional. And of course, the great advantage of the FTC in comparison to European data protection authorities is that it has an experience of rigorous enforcement in competition law against infringements of the rules of protecting against illegal agreements between enterprises in antitrust. And this experience hopefully now transitions across the corridor to the other colleagues who deal with privacy. And I would love to see this learning from competition law transiting into privacy taking place also in Europe. So I think we're all looking forward to the FTC doing its job under the rule of law in America, applying American law, maybe also making a reference to the safe harbor and the privacy shield where America took commitments towards Europe, and Facebook undersigned these commitments relating to respecting privacy rules of European nature, I would say. Privacy rules which provide equivalent protection of individuals when they process, when Facebook, for example, processes data from Europe in America. And so the FTC has a potential here to show that these agreements actually mean something, namely by basing this fine also on this non-respect of these agreements, if such non-respect is found by the FTC. But it also has the chance to bring America into the lead, and I would say also historically speaking, one could say, if one has a certain perspective on the development and academic analysis of privacy, back into the lead on privacy by demonstrating that it's not only important to have rules on the books, but also to enforce the rules. So there is therefore, I would say, not necessarily a situation of opposition between Europe and America on these issues, but we are struggling on both sides of the Atlantic with the same challenges for public interest and the same problems, and we can learn a lot from each other. And this learning can also take place in relation to the future shaping of AI. And like in relation to data protection and privacy, I think first of all, the interdisciplinary approach will be key here. Because this is probably, after the internet, the second big wave of technology, where in everything which is done, we have to think in terms of a societal approach. Internet policy already is actually societal policy. It's not only technology policy. The internet reaches today via the mobile devices everywhere. It is the forum for public debate in democracy. It allows to control people. It allows to centralize information. It's much more than just something which should be left to technologists and to be debated under the heading technology. It is present in all spheres of life, and a fortiori, if it's true, as we hear, that AI will be as pervasive as electricity, we have to look at AI in the same way as we look at rules which we make in legislation. Because AI will contain these rules according to which decisions are made, because it will take largely the decisions, this technology, these programs. And if it doesn't take decisions, it will guide people, and some would say nudge or manipulate people in a certain direction. So certainly it will have huge impacts, both on our individual freedoms and on our actions, but also collectively on how law and democracy function. And that is the first reason why there is so much debate about AI, apart from the economic earning potential and efficiency potential for economy and also innovation processes which may arise. The second reason why the debate is so intense and so broad is because we are struggling with a new challenge of autonomy of technology. Who will be responsible for the new causalities which may be caused by a program which learns and therefore evolves, and maybe evolves in a direction which was not intended by the creator? Who will be responsible for damages which such a program creates, economic, but maybe also physical, environmental damages, but also under public law without damages? So this question of liability has already led the European Commission to set up a special working group with experts on civil law liability, torts, And the question which is posed obviously is, should AI be a subject of strict liability? We have in Europe, like in the United States, very strict rules on product liability. Should they be applied to AI? And here, as also on all the other issues, we are in a very broad thinking process, a process which I would say a process of iterative learning. On the one hand, interdisciplinary, in debates between philosophers, lawyers, political scientists, sociologists, anthropologists, and the technological world, both in academic capacity but also in terms of companies, but also in an iterative learning process in 3 or 4 directions, one could say. First of all, within the European Union, between the European level and the member states governments, but also civil society. And on the other hand, of course, the global process, which was so amply described by my colleague, Consulate General from the French Consulate General here in Boston. So in this learning process, the Commission has focused on the ethics. We have assembled a group of 52 independent experts, well, as far as one can call, people also who come from business independent. There were consciously also business representatives in this group. They have produced 2 papers which have been made public, the second paper being an iteration of the first paper. And the Commission has just taken this paper and on the 8th of April in a communication made largely the content of these principles on ethics its own. So there is now a communication of the European Commission on the table of 8th of April on the building of AI which we can trust, trustworthy AI. And the principles which we would like to see in this trustworthy AI from the outset integrated evolve around 3 big pillars. We want AI to be trustworthy because it acts lawfully. So one could say these programs should never take action which, if a human would commit them, would be illegal. Lawfulness. And that's not small fry. In a business climate, in a world where in business schools the future managers are taught about disruptive innovation, and it's absolutely okay as part of disruptive innovation to disrupt the law. That is probably not a concept which we can afford with AI. I would say we have seen a lot of disrupting the law in the internet age. The European Commission already had to impose 8.3 billion euros of fines on Google for not complying with our competition rules. We had to impose a decision on Apple to pay taxes in Ireland, 11 billion euros of taxes not paid. You all have followed the debates about copyright, about Uber just coming in, about Airbnb doing whatever they want. So there is an issue in the digital, in the internet business of disrupting the law, or others say, let's move on and excuse later. I would say that is something where we have to be careful to apply this thinking also to AI. Yes, we want to be innovative. We want innovators to thrive, but not in illegality. So lawfulness, first principle. Second, beyond the law, the development of the technology should be ethically based. Not all what is good and necessary in a society can be put into laws. The law is the strongest sword you need it to be able to enforce. But there are other things which go beyond, and that's ethics.